So recently, the Among Us competitor Fall Guys has made itself a pretty good comeback, regaining a bunch of its original popularity from late 2020. However, something that people say was the real killer of Fall Guys was of course the game Among Us. And I don't blame them for this thought. I mean, they were both multiplayer party games, were heavily focused on playing with friends and other people, both used bean-like characters, and both were small indie games that saw success from the online scene through YouTube and TikTok. Not to mention that Among Us blew up right as Fall Guys began to fall off. However, that was in 2020 and it's 2022 now, and as I'm sure all of you guys are aware of, as Fall Guys regains its insane popularity, Among Us has seen basically no growth since the end of 2020. And I don't want to speak too soon, but I may even say it's gotten to the point where even the sussy memes are beginning to die. But here in 2022, what has really happened to Among Us and what is the state of it? Well, first I want to recap what has led to where we are right now real quick, and I'm sure you're familiar with the first part. Among Us was released in 2018 as a mobile exclusive game, and eventually through updates it began to grow over time, leading to the game's eventual release on the PC, and then following debatedly the biggest turning point, the addition of online gameplay rather than just local games. The title steadily developed, and although for multiple years the game was doing so poor that the developers admitted that working on the game was a bad decision, we got a glimpse of luck during mid-2020, around the time other games like Fall Guys got popular. Now at this point, Among Us was already gaining some traction, no doubt, and by early 2020, it was finally being worth their time to actually keep developing the game. But this minor success would be nothing compared to what would happen around July and August when the game would absolutely explode in popularity. The game immediately became one of the biggest around and everyone was talking about it, and there's a few reasons for this. If you watched my previous Fall Guys video, the reason for Among Us's blow up were actually incredibly similar. The pandemic attracted people to online games to play with friends when they were seeking new ways to interact with them, as it was statistically proven months into the pandemic that people were actually getting depressed from not being able to socialize with their friends. So Among Us was there to solve that. The game was really cheap and was actually totally free on mobile with ads, which made it easy to play. And the biggest reason, at least in my opinion, was the streamers who played this game to extensive levels. Fall Guys was just becoming popular around the exact same time, and a flaw that killed Fall Guys was that after about a week, the streamers who exposed this game to so many people got bored and started to venture out into new things, which opened the gate for a new video game that fed the same audience but with tons of new features known as Among Us. Another thing that made it so popular was the fact that with a multiplayer game like Among Us that was designed to be played with friends exclusively, that meant that streamers and YouTubers were partnering up to make up lobbies of up to 10 at the time of this explosion. This is so important because that meant you'd have Critical, Valkyrie, Pokimane, and all streamers exposing this game from 18-year-old Discord mods to 40-year-old tier 3 subscribers. And they all shared one thing in common, which is that they're easily influenced by the streamers that they're watching. And when combining all these different streamers, all these diverse audiences of millions were all being exposed consistently to Among Us, which just made it a recipe for success. People after just a few weeks were already at this point questioning the game's popularity, but of course that was something that everyone was wondering right after what happened to Fall Guys and the trend of pretty much calling anything dead, which admittedly I was slightly a part of. But anyway, this was a pretty good success story for Among Us. They believed in something when they had nothing in 2018, and it grew to be one of the biggest games literally of all time. Now from its blow up all the way to where we are now, it's pretty much smooth sailing, but throughout that entire time there's been one consistent problem with Among Us, which is that it's sort of failed to innovate itself really at all. When the game first got popular, it was almost immediately announced that Among Us 2 was going to be developed in order to fix the development issues that made updating the original game so hard, but this is something that would very quickly get cancelled because the team regained confidence that the first Among Us could handle all these updates. But this would then become an extreme issue because Among Us had to innovate itself by adding cool new features, but they now also had to build it on a game that was not designed to be built upon very well. The most notable example of this was the long-awaited airship map that was supposed to release shortly after the game's initial blow-up, but after some delays, it wouldn't actually come out until March of 2021, long after the game had reached its peak in player bases. From this point forward, there would be a few other updates, most of which being incredibly unsuccessful. Most notably, things like the additions of quick chats, which were designed to make talking with a bunch of people a lot easier, but the reception of this update would be awful as the quick chats were inefficient, annoying, and they made the already difficult solo queue lobbies basically unplayable. But anyway, this leads up to where we are here in 2022 for Among Us, reaching almost years since its original peak. So what has happened with the game this year? Well, the first thing we would get was a relatively uninteresting roadmap that showed plans of adding a hide and seek mode, new roles, and as they would say in the actual text, a supposed fifth map, which would be huge. Around this time, another in-development feature that was coming soon was a friends list, allowing for people to actually add and talk to an organized group of people by adding them to their friends list. This feature literally took months on months to release, but it did actually end up coming out in super late March of this year. After working on that, they apparently began to overhaul the quality of life aspects of the game. These big changes, by the way, included a colorblind mode, a streamer mode, and the removal of guest accounts, forcing everyone to make an account to play. Yep, that's basically it. We are over halfway done with 2022, and we got a friends list and some accessibility features along with the super unpopular removal of guest accounts. Are you starting to see a slight problem here? Look, I'm not here to criticize the developers of Among Us too much because I don't really know much about game development fundamentally at all, but what I do know is that a friends list probably doesn't need to take this many months, at least in a normal game. But that's the problem, we're not talking about an easy to develop normal game here. We are talking about Among Us, the one that, as we previously mentioned, was not designed very well and therefore set the developers back a ton in time. This isn't something that I'm just complaining about, by the way. Everybody seems to be upset with the state of Among Us, and this doesn't just cause people to complain on Twitter and then forget about it and hop back on the game. It's actually showing in their Steam numbers, going from 25,000 players in October of last year all the way to right around 10,000 players, give or take a few here today. That's a huge difference, and that's not even comparing the game to its original peaks. That's just the consistent drop that Among Us is facing in terms of player bases every single month. Now, 10,000 isn't necessarily bad, but the fact that it's dropping so much and so quickly is. 2022 has been a year of constant decline for Among Us, and it's almost back to where it started in player bases compared to before it ever even blew up, which is unbelievable to think about when considering its impact on gaming nowadays. It was literally breaking records, and now it's all the way down to where it was before, despite it supposedly improving as a game. So why has 2022 been so horrible for Among Us? Well, it's for similar reasons why 2021 was a bad year as well, and why Among Us sort of lost a lot of hype quickly. And that's because when initially thinking about what to do with Among Us after its blow up in 2020, this previously mentioned decision they had to make between making Among Us 2 or just updating the original has sort of came back to bite them. Not because I think the solution was literally to entirely recreate Among Us again as a sequel, but the short-term benefits of only updating the original version without changing it at all are starting to run thin, and updating the game is starting to take longer as everything is getting more complex and they're not adding nearly as much. Now, I want to get something straight here. Among Us is not like your normal big game like Minecraft or Call of Duty, obviously, because those games in particular are generally designed to be grinded. Those games are built to be played over and over again for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's just how they are. While Among Us, like other games, is designed to be played at very specific volumes. Does that mean it's a worse game or it can't be successful? No, not at all. But that generally means if people are rarely going back to the game, they need good reasons to come back. This is a strategy that had worked before in their initial airship update despite its delays, and with other updates there's been other minor spikes here and there, which I think is actually a good thing, because people just aren't supposed to come back to a game like Among Us every single day. It just gets old too quick naturally. But that also means if you want the players to come back, it has to be for a good reason. And I'm assuming that you're watching this video because you haven't really heard about the game or any of its updates at all this year, and realistically, after I just explained every single thing that's happened, are you convinced to hop on the game to check out what's different? Probably not. Especially since there's no real way you're gonna play it in like random lobbies or something. So if you want to play the game, you need to go through the hassle of calling up a big group just to make it any fun. Fundamentally, I think the game is great, and I don't think anyone's really arguing that here. But with it being so inspired by other party games like Mafia or even Clue to an extent, it has the same effect as those games where you play them a few times with friends and then they end up sitting on shelves for weeks to come. But the thing is, the advantage that Among Us has had is that it's a video game that can update and change itself. And I just don't really think that's what's been happening with the game. It has gotten no twists or turns to make it any more interesting to the casual audience since the airship update. But although that's why I believe the game hasn't really been able to keep any consistency for the past couple of years in player bases, maybe that's also not what they're trying to do. I mean, Among Us is pretty timeless because it's so simple and is revolved around the people actually playing the game themselves. So maybe the goal isn't to force people to want to keep playing the game over and over, but rather convince them to hold on to it for occasional party nights with friends, very similar to target audiences of these board games and such. That could be the case, however, while Among Us itself seems to be in a pretty bad place in terms of its quality, reputation, and dare I even say its meme value, there is one thing that people are still talking about quite a bit that actually does make me question something about this game's longevity, and that is Among Us on the VR. If you didn't know, recently Among Us actually announced that it was going to be coming to the VR sometime soon, and I actually think this concept is amazing for a couple of reasons. For one, everybody wants to play Among Us in first person. It was a super popular Danny video even, and it's been replicated in other places before like VR chat very successfully. So naturally Among Us would dip their toes into this VR space and actually make their very own official version, which would be really nice, especially when considering the other substitutes for Among Us VR have been pretty questionable. I not only think that this would be a great concept just based on the fact that it's worked in other avenues without any advertising by Among Us themselves, but also look at the release date of this thing. Holiday of 2022. Now that's a long ways away, but there's a good reason for this release date, and that is of course because it's around Christmas time. Or in other words, a lot of people are getting their very first VR headsets. And generally around the holidays, virtual reality absolutely spikes in popularity. Games like Gorilla Tag or Beat Saber are some absolute must-tries for the VR, and Among Us would be a pretty obvious addition to that arsenal of games. Because I mean, what kid wouldn't want to try that exact concept? And since VR games generally strive in being incredibly simple in concept, I think that Among Us has literally been begging to be in VR. So yeah, Among Us is honestly in a pretty negative spot because it doesn't feel like even the developers know what the real goals of Among Us are, and it's showing in their player bases as they plummet while people sort of forget about them. But that's not to say that they're without attempts, with a full-blown VR game coming out by the end of the year. Will the VR version be any good? Is Among Us dead? And could it be revived this year after the sharp decline? Well, I'm not sure, but I guess we'll find out in the future. Comment below your thoughts.